latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a great guest, Glenn Roil, who I will introduce you to shortly. Just to remind you, this is a live show. You're listening to it on a Wednesday evening in the UK at 9 p.m. But whatever your time is, it's Wednesday the 15th of December at the moment. So if it's Wednesday the 15th of December where you are, it's probably live. And the information I'm going to give you is relevant. If it's not Wednesday the 15th, don't use this phone number I'm going to give you because you'll probably wake me up at 4 a.m. or something. But anyway, you're welcome to join in. Drop us a line on +44 7506 319 745, and the number will go out on one of the platforms that we're live streaming on. That's it, really. This evening, I've got a great guy who's joining us from Newfoundland in Canada, I believe. Is it Newfoundland you're in, Glenn?
Yes, Noel, Newfoundland.
Yeah, so it's great to have you on. We were chatting yesterday after many sort of technical hiccups on my part, and because I'm incompetent with my team is the truth. So just organising a simple Zoom meeting with you, it seemed like I sort of kept getting it wrong, and you're in one of those weird time zones I don't quite understand. You're 3.5 hours behind us. I've never understood those time zones which are a half hour behind us, but that's what you are. So welcome to join us. How are things up in Canada at the moment?
Lovely. Very cold, snowy winter day in Newfoundland in the most easterly part of Canada. Hopefully we'll get a bit of warmer weather towards the end of the weekend.
Great. But I guess it's a bit colder anyway at that sort of latitude, is it?
Generally it is, like you say, being in the northern part of the hemisphere, it is outside the summer, but yeah, it's generally cold the good portion of the year.
Well, it's lovely to have you on, and we were chatting yesterday, as I said, catching up, and sort of just getting to know your story. And you've just recently, I think, won or were shortlisted at least for a sort of a prize in your state, I believe, in a sort of human rights award.
Yes, that's correct, Noel. I was one of 3 recipients of the Human Rights Award here in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, championing the great work that I'm doing around mental illness and mental health awareness at all, and very honoured to receive it from our Lieutenant Governor, the Honourable Judy Foote. Well
done, congratulations to you. And your sort of involvement in the field of mental health is in peer support organisations, and you have personal experience of mental illness and going through various systems, which is what we're going to talk about this evening. But sort of it started quite early for you, I think, in terms of your experience as a guy. And I think we're talking about you as a guy as well, because you have some experiences which I think are unique and relevant to men who come into contact with mental health services. So you were, I think, diagnosed relatively young, I think, with anxiety and OCD, weren't you?
That's correct, Noel. As our conversation happened there on Tuesday yesterday, we said I think I've lived with anxiety and OCD a good majority of my life at all, and official diagnosis of generalized anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder was around the age of 15.
Yeah, and then but it got quite serious, I think, because at one point you ended up in psychiatric hospital, so which indicates that actually you were struggling quite a lot with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably another 10 years forward, so around 24, 25, the anxiety really got worse, sort of thing, and I spent a 10-day stint inside our one of our facilities, Health Science Centre, or one of the psychiatric units.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of, I think, an instructive story about how where things can end up, because I think people tend to think of things like anxiety and OCD as not that serious, and particularly with OCD, the sort of image is that you might have to go back and wash your hands a few times, but it isn't that serious. But actually, it has had quite a significant impact on your life. Sort of, was it something that was in your family? Do you think these types of things around anxiety, depression, etc., those types of problems? Did they exist in your childhood, as it were?
Well, what I've learned, in the last number of years, and first when I got diagnosed, a lot of the physicians and psychiatrists were looking at, they need to do background checks in terms of, family history and stuff like that. And I think they were saying on either side there was no history, but as I've learned going back on my father and my mother's side, there was, I think, significant undiagnosed mental illness and mental health challenges on both sides of the family.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, isn't it? That
Absolutely.
the diagnoses would not have been, oh, this person has generalized anxiety disorder. If it was 75 years ago, that's not the terminology that people would have used. And the sort of terminology I think I've come across is things like, oh, she had a breakdown, or he ended up sort of in a rest home and things like that. And it would have been talked about euphemistically. And is that the type of thing you've begun to uncover about your family history?
Yeah, correct. And I mean, like you're saying, of issues of people having bad nerves, or, learning that I had a great relative that ended up in one of the care homes outside the city of St. John's. And like, even though my great grandfather was one of the first Blue Patees that fought in the war, back in the day, I don't think he had PTSD because the terminology was shell shock. So, yes. But I think, from experiences, people will acquire various mental health challenges, and it's how you deal with them. I think that's how you succeed in life. And if you don't, well, you might be challenged more.
Absolutely. And sorry, you use the term the Blue Patees. That's a new one on me. What's that?
What that was, it was the first 500 Newfoundland men that went over and fought in the Great War, in the First World War, and it was that the women and the ladies of the province used blue coloring uniform, and so they were recognized as the Blue Patees, sort of thing. And actually, my great grandfather did survive the Battle of the Somme on July 1st, 1916, wow. And he and 68 others that did come back got prominent positions with the Dominion of Newfoundland, and he was Lieutenant Governor Sheriff for nearly 40 years.
But as you say, I think that there was a lot of men who came back from those experiences with what we would now call PTSD, but in those days were undiagnosed. In fact, it's only in the last, I think, 5 years ago that the government finally acknowledged how brutal we'd been towards certainly soldiers in the UK during World War I who had been shot for cowardice when in fact they were suffering from PTSD and they couldn't fight any longer. And so we had quite a big thing, I think it was about 5 years ago, and the government pardoned a lot of these guys that had the stigma of having been listed as cowards and deserters, and having sort of faced being shot, which there's a certain really dark irony about the fact that you get shot by the army that you develop these sort of conditions for. So that's the sort of history. I know that you have, you're from culturally an Irish background and were Irish immigrants at some point into Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Noel, at all. That Irish, Scottish, of people that immigrated from, the Welsh countries, England, or at all, going back several generations.
I mean, you're definitely, you've got the Irish lilt in you still. So somehow the accent was kept, or is that very Canadian?
Very much to the province of Newfoundland, I think, is that cultural perspective at all, because when I do travel across the country in Canada and elsewhere, everybody thinks that I actually am coming from Ireland or from the UK.
Yes, I think as well. I mean, my family are all from Ireland, so you're sounding to me like a guy from a similar part of the world that my dad comes from, to be honest, which is Newbridge, just outside of Dublin. And before people phone me up and tell me that's wrong, I might be wrong. It's a long time since I've been in Newbridge, but there you go. But you do. And what was the sort of family background immediately that you grew up in then? Was it sort of informed psychologically? Unlikely, but you might as well ask.
Well, probably not, sort of thing at all. And as I was saying to you yesterday, Tuesday, that I had a grandmother that was really supportive about me, and I think is only having her, and she's passed on from a number of years, was my rock that helped me, and she raised me for the first few. So that bond was tighter there than my own biological mother at all, even though I had good parents and I had, two other siblings that are younger than me.
And what has been historically, what was the response of your family to the fact that you were struggling with anxiety and finding it difficult to engage with people? And I'm guessing also that you would have found it quite difficult at school as well to sort of socially engage with people. You might have even been quite odd to people.
That's correct, Noel. Yeah. I think my parents were concerned, and, being back in the early part of the 70s and 80s, as, I was born and I grew up, the conversation of recovery and mental health wasn't really out in the forefront.
No, it wasn't. That certainly wasn't at all.
And again, like wiping stuff, I think, under the closet, or, in the closet, as they say it all. And, I had a relative who effectively, when I was 17, really having challenges in school, because I never had a lot of close friends for, quote unquote, the anxiety, as they say. Glenn was a very shy, quiet child sort of thing. And like, she effectively walked away from me when I was struggling at my most, and saying that, like, if somebody else was going through it, you would rather have somebody to be supportive versus turn their back or be destructive against you, sort of thing. So I found that to be very, very troubling, not having family that truly comprehended what I was dealing with.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, people might think that it's no longer the case. I mean, I don't think it is true. I think it is still the case that when there's a member of the family that has obvious mental illness, even if it's not called that, it can have quite an impact on other members of the family in terms of fears around that person and stigma around that person, and leads to isolation and struggles. And you're describing that a family that found you difficult and weren't so comforting and supportive, maybe.
That's correct. Yeah, I know. There was many times that my younger sister and brother, as they were progressing, as I was having challenges through the school system, sort of thing. Hindsight, my parents thought it was good to hold back information. Again, my grandmother kind of said, Glenn should be, kept in the loop, sort of thing at all, and being forced to go to various family functions that I didn't feel comfortable with. And as the old adage of keeping up with the Joneses, because again, this is no different than in today's society. You got relatives that are doing better than others, and at the end of the day, you shouldn't have grandparents or others criticizing, where their grandchildren or where their children is at all. Like, as my grandmother said, Glenn will achieve when he is meant to achieve, and is clearly showing the evidence, the work that I do today and over the last probably 20 years now.
Yeah, and I mean, yes, we should remember that this shy boy that couldn't do anything now is receiving awards from the governor of Newfoundland. I mean, it's sort of that's quite an extraordinary journey, and those awards are around how you're helping other people. So that is quite a journey. We'll sort of bear that in mind. If you don't mind, we'll stick with that early story a little bit, because I think it's not the past we're talking about here, folks. It's, for many people, the present. This is how they're experiencing, and this is how they are experienced in their families and in their communities and in their schools. And we still have a long way to go towards people understanding what psychological distress looks like. It doesn't come nicely packaged with nice people don't come with explanations and little leaflets stuck to them saying, I have psychological distress, my behaviors are because of. That's not the way it is. What happens is the sort of experience that you had, Glenn, which is that people found you frightening and difficult and strange, I guess.
Yeah. And that put extra burden and extra stress on me, being challenged as a young person and a child and a teenager, sort of thing, and going through the degrees of puberty and figuring out what you want. And as like I've stated, in a story that's just been recently published through Johns Hopkins University, through an American bioethics journal, I didn't even have a girlfriend until I was well into my 20s and 30s. So, I was challenged on other aspects of my life. And, you really got to understand that there's a lot of people going through this. And the more that you can hold compassion and understanding, acceptance for your loved ones, the better the outcomes for everybody. Because at the end of the day, you're in a period of time, especially now around the Christmas period, that suicide rates are high because of the pandemic, but extremely high because people are under so much stress, including financial and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that bit, I want to say something about, we had a conversation about it, that sort of the marketing for this particular episode of the show includes the sort of name of a company that you have a franchise with. And I was confused about why that we were going to go with that. So I specifically raised the issue with you. And I think it's for a later bit of the conversation. But the reason I kept on it after our talk yesterday was you reminded me of how important all aspects of health is: economic health, relationship health. All of these things are really important in terms of recovery around mental illness. And actually what happens for many people who get labelled and diagnosed with a mental illness and end up in mental health services is that the capacity to become economically productive is severely reduced. And you've turned that on its head and very successful, even though your company, your franchise has been challenged during the pandemic, which is also partly why I want to advertise it, so that we can get you back on your feet as well. It's really important. What's interesting for me is when we were talking is you had an experience which I think is, I know this from facts and figures, from the evidence, that your first real contact with services because of your psychological distress was actually the police, not sort of mental health services. Is that correct?
The first kind of, full degree of intervention at all. Like I said, I've had interactions with, some psychologists and some, first time being diagnosed through psychiatry at all, and not really positive results. But in terms of significant change to where I am today, yes, absolutely at all. And I think that's been a defining moment of my life.
And what's intriguing for me is that the evidence is with this statement that often that's the first real point of contact for men with psychological distress is through the criminal justice system. Yes. Because psychological distress can present in a specific way with men, which is that the distress can be interpreted as threatening and challenging. Yeah. And that's not to justify or rationalize sort of antisocial or aggressive or violent behaviors on people, but it's just to understand it. And do you mind talking about, you don't need to mention who was involved, because I think it did involve family. You don't really need to talk about that stuff, but you give us in broad sense of what was it that happened to you, and where did you end up with that in terms of the intervention of the police? And then we'll look at the amazing work you've been doing at sort of working with that reality now. So if you don't mind, just briefly tell us that story.
Yeah, absolutely. As I always keep saying to you, and I said to others, kind of my 9/11, JFK or Pearl Harbor Day, it will, live in my infamy, was going back to the 28th of March 2008. And again, very challenged economically and socially in relationships and otherwise. Yeah. And there was an instance between me and a family member sort of thing at all. And that particular evening, the police service did show up, and, I was arrested for a very minor assault and taken to our city lockup and effectively assessed by one of the psychiatrists or chief psychiatrists here in the province. And what he said to me is that, like, all Glen really needs is proper support. And where my family effectively turned their back on me, at times, even this family member had a hard time actually having their signature put on the document to have me arrested, because they knew of me falling through the pitfalls of the criminal justice and the police service. I ended up into one of the oldest correctional facilities in Newfoundland and Labrador at all. And through a period of almost 40 days, outside being sprung by a good mental health lawyer in public defense, that was quite an experience. And the individuals and the degrees of lockdown and isolation and segregation, and everybody said, how did you survive that? And I always keep saying, it's either I'm a strong-willed individual or I have great faith, as we'll potentially talk about some part through that, because I think that's what's kept me very sane and well through this process. And the other perspective to your viewers, Noel, and I haven't made mention to you, outside of when I was very young on medication, for the last well over 20 years, I have not been on medication. Yeah. And as the interaction of my work my community, my partner, and others in my life that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear. I mean, it's interesting, I think, that you have been able to reframe that experience of being locked up because of your distress as a gift. I mean, I you know, that's the sign that we're very well, is that we can sort of reframe our experience and go, well, actually, that opened the door to something else for me. And I think that's really, and that's a really useful sort of lesson to share at the moment for people who are going through distress, that it may well be you're going through something new that will actually be helpful for you. And we can't know while we're going through tough times what it actually means. But that idea of having faith that it could become something very important, I think is a really, really significant thing. And you've talked about your faith. I mean, you have a religious faith, but it doesn't, I guess, need to be religious faith. It could be faith, or in the broadest sense, that there's something bigger than me. Yeah.
Absolutely, and as I also, another part of the story to your viewers to tell, the individual that did sign, there was a small degree of reconciliation, a couple of years after it all, and again the criminal charge was dropped. So I don't sit with any criminal records.
Yeah, I mean, we're not. I don't think we need to get caught up in what happened, the specifics of it. I think the general story is very familiar, and will be very familiar to men who are listening, in particular, that distress for guys can be experienced within and outside of the family as a challenge, and the guys can get labelled as frightening and as a problem and scapegoated because of it. It is in the nature of scapegoating, as you know, that often we do things that justify the scapegoating because we are isolated. It is difficult, and at times we will act out, and that's what happens. But it's a very familiar story to me that then what happens is that the police get involved. Because the guy has been in significant distress. You say that you met some advocates, mental health advocates, when you were in the criminal justice system, this solicitor, and I think a doctor as well, a psychiatrist.
That's correct, and I mean, they have very much astonished and I know the word unbelievable at all. And I'll get back to that fake conversation about that broader perspective, as we continue. And like today, both of those individuals and even people from the clergy who, when I was first was looking for, clergy services inside the institution, they thought I was actually a visiting professor from one of our universities here. They didn't think I was actually, as quote unquote an inmate sort of thing. So that really spoke of how I carried myself at all, Noel. And I think, a prime example is that, whatever card you're, it's like the thing about lemonade, you make lemons out of lemonade, whatever, it's just like, every day, everybody has choices at all. And the opportunity to do for better at all, hopefully, but some people are challenged even more, sort of thing. But
I think that's true. I think that's true, and I think your story is testimony to that, and it's a very impressive story. It also, I think, it wasn't long after that, was it, before you had a period of time in a psych ward as well, I think, after your contact with the police.
No, the 10 days were prior to the interaction with the police, sort of thing at all. But like you said, I did an outpatient after the perspective with the police, and again, from the vantage point with the National Police Service here in this country, and one of the deputies in this province, have great respect for what I do. So like I've really maybe have come full circle. And just shown is that,
let's talk about that, because some of the things that you're doing with the police at the moment, based upon your experiences of, you're diagnosed at an early age, you have some period of inpatient incarceration psych ward, and you still end up in the prison system, which is, again, a very similar story for a lot of guys. And we could say, there's one approach to that would be to say, this is wrong, we've got to change the whole of society and make some unrealistic demands of things that are not likely to happen. But you haven't done that. What you've done is you started working with the police because they're likely to be picking up guys like you, right? So tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing with the police and that you're involved in, maybe not directly, but that you know about and you're involved with in your area of Canada.
Yeah, well, just after that whole interaction with the police service, I got involved with an organization here called Channel, which is, dealing with people with lived experience, that peer piece at all. And from that sprung me to sit on a number of senior boards with the provincial government and national governments and national mental health associations here to rewrite legislation. And actually, I was a focal point to help to create the first walk-in mental health services in this province called Doorways. And it
Right.
was like no different as I said to one of our former directors, is like if you're going into a shopping mall, like it shouldn't has to be part of a regional health authority. You could be going into having this program into a big shopping center. So are you going shopping for clothes, going to see a movie, or are you availing of mental health services? So helping to destigmatize that whole issue of mental illness and mental health challenges.
I mean, it blows me away when you're talking about it. It's about 40 years ahead of where we are at the moment. I mean, it's extraordinary stuff. The idea that mental health services are so embedded in everyday life, and like you say, that I fancy a pair of jeans, and also I'll go and sort out my mental health at the same time. It's like ideal. That's exactly what you want. It's lovely, the idea that you transformed your experience, which could have left you bitter and angry, I suppose, that the system is failing you, your family's failing you. What was it that stopped you, do you think, from just becoming yet another angry white male statistic, particularly in the sort of context of Canada and incel and stuff like that, and which you know about, and but you didn't go that route. I mean, you didn't sort of become the lone white male gunman shooting people. You've done something else. And what stopped you, do you think?
Well, like I say, it could be my faith or it could be the perspective that, taking a negative experience and actually having the opportunity to turn for better and probably taking full responsibility for my life, which I was very much left to my own with my family turning their back and not having great supports versus the great friends and the great partners I've had over the years that have really had my back. And I tell you to this day at all, if I never had these individuals, and it's not just the people I work, it's really true friends that I've acquired over time. I call them my honorary family, and for holidays and birthdays and other celebrations, they always include me, and that just makes me so happy. And I know there's so many other people out there struggling so much, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so I don't know, maybe a combination of factors, as I said to you yesterday too, Noel, Tuesday, is that I want to leave this world better than when I came in at some point at all. And I got lots of years
You
yet to do
are. Now today, Glenn, you're making it aware. I mean, I bring up those issues simply because that is the narrative around toxic masculinity at the moment, is that what happens is guys can't cope with life and they go get a gun and they shoot people. That's not all guys, actually. And Glenn, you're a good example of somebody who has tough times but actually turns them around. I would humbly suggest that you're probably in the majority in terms of people who have tough times and men who have tough times. That you learn from it and you turn it into something positive. I'm interested in this police response because obviously I think the US is the country. Have you heard of the United States of America? It's just below you.
Yes.
Might have heard of it, yeah. And there, the mental health system seems to be the police shooting you if you're a bloke.
Yeah.
It literally, I mean, I don't mean that facetiously. I mean that absolutely seriously. That if you're a guy struggling psychologically, you will present in a way in the US that frightens people. And because it's quite a frightening culture at times, the police are often sent in and people end up dead.
Absolutely. And I think, the other perspective too, you were saying, Noel, about like what turned me around and not going out and having a gun and, pretty much clearing out the place, was that I think I was extremely frightened from the experience and knowing when I lost my freedom.
Right.
The perspective is that how valuable and how quickly that can be taken away from you at all. And like you're saying in the United States, our southern neighbors, the perspective of police coming in and just putting bullets into black people, black men particularly, and others. And because the same thing has happened in this country, that there's been a couple of black females in the eastern part of this country that bullets have gone in when they've been in mental health distress. And again, as just you need mental health professionals, you need people like myself that have had first-hand experience and others to help de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, yeah, and sort of, because I guess what we forget is that the police officers going in, no matter how well trained they are not mental health professionals and are never going to be. But what intrigues me is this idea that sort of that rather than try and fight reality and say we have to, defund the police or we have to do this or you've actually found a way of working with the situation to produce or introduce support into the system. And I know that also in your area of Canada that there are social workers and other professionals that go with the police and help deal with some of these people in crisis, in psychiatric crisis.
Yeah. The here in Canada we have the ACT team and the flex teams, as well as like the mobile crisis teams, where you have social workers and registered nurses or psychiatric nurses, along with some units that have actually people with lived experience that go in to help de-escalate. And actually, the stats out of this province in Newfoundland and in Canada, that 75% of the calls that the police service get in this country, in this province, is related to mental health. So like that is the biggest, perspective sort of thing outside very serious crime. So, they're trying to reallocate resources, and I think they need to push more resources into that area, because more fatal shootings of people in mental health distress. I think there's going to be a global cry for better, because people can't, people that are sick is a health issue. They're not criminals.
Yeah. I think there's something about the pandemic. I don't know if this is going to be true, and I certainly don't wish struggle on people. It's not. I don't. Having had psychiatric distress in my life, sure I will again. It's not something I'd wish on somebody. It's unpleasant. It's difficult. It's a challenging experience. But there is something I think about the pandemic which has brought the issues of psychological distress much more to the foreground in terms of everybody's everyday lived experience. And that the dividing line between healthy and not healthy, I think, has just gone away now. And people can identify much more because they've had tough experiences over the last couple of years. I don't know what your feeling is around that in terms of the impact on the...
I think, the collective societies at all, I think it's been very challenged because, as humans, as and in the professional work that you've done over the years, Noel, we are social creatures and we need to interact well. And I think, as I said to many friends and others, I think a bit of a blessing in disguise when I dealt with social isolation many years ago. It maybe was a help from going through this pandemic and knowing how to deal, being isolated. But again,
I agree, actually. I think that lots of people who had previous distress and isolation from that distress had the skill set to manage this isolation much better. And I guess that's one of the things that seems to have happened, is that people who hadn't had the isolation issues, the social isolation issues because of their distress, now experience it for another reason, and maybe can empathize and understand much more how that produces odd behaviors in us. Because it does, if we're isolated, we start to behave in very strange ways, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, Noel, the stats are good in this country, I'm assuming in the UK and elsewhere in the world, is that the consumption of alcohol and cannabis and tobacco and all other vices sort of thing, healthy food, and other activities, very much went through the roof sort of thing at all. And even people, ability to try to connect, on all these dating apps and stuff like that, they said just went right through the roof. And it's like people needing an opportunity to connect. And I think a lot of people were very much challenged over the last 2 years, and hopefully people have better coping skills and using voices.
Yeah, absolutely. And greater awareness and empathy as well about the needs. It's sort of interesting because part of your experience from the days when I guess you still have anxiety and OCD, but you are sort of much more integrated in the wider world in a sense. But in those days when you weren't and you were isolated, you also talked about the lack of intimate connection particularly with the opposite sex. And we're not going to go into details because it's not what it's about. But you were very isolated from that as well, weren't you, in terms of not having a girlfriend or a partner for quite until you relatively old in our cultural standards.
And that's correct, Noel, at all. And like I say, that was another big, very challenging time, growing up as a teenager at all. And, for people entering the dating scene and, going to the proms and doing all those things, which I very much missed out on, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And only, from the vantage point that I've had some relationships and, challenged and luckily now with somebody very good. That's another thing, like men don't really express well their feelings if they're having challenges in relationships. And that also potentially
certainly don't.
No, and I think that's why, again, statistical stats in this country, it's similar to the UK and elsewhere, that like domestic homicide and domestic abuse is very much through the roof. So it's all interlocked, all interconnected. And I've said to you and I've said to others, maybe not actually dating when I was young, when I've gone through some challenging breakup in relationships, I maybe wouldn't be able to handle this as well as an adult versus being a teenager or a young adult sort of thing. So as I always keep saying, don't always feel that you got to be part of hitting markers at some point in life. I'm prime example at all. It will happen when it's meant to happen.
Yeah, and your recovery is solid and I can hear it. Let's take us back a little bit of time though, because you did get involved with people and maybe not so successfully because of, again, as a sort of consequence of the isolation and the experiences and the distress. Do you mind talking? We talked a little bit about that yesterday. Are you okay to talk a little bit about it, just to offer identification to other guys
Sure.
listening?
Yeah. Now, like you say, one of my significant, as I was getting older, first into that dating relationship, was extremely challenged, and this individual. She was dealing with a bit more serious mental illnesses and more on the spectrum of, you're talking maybe more like, bipolar and schizophrenia, which is very challenging versus the majority of people dealing with anxiety and depression and just challenged of with her children and her family and others. And everybody said, like, you were staying a loyal and faithful partner and, maybe at the risk of making my mental health unwell, but, I got through and went on to some other sort of thing. And every relationship, I've taken something good out of it at all, even though that several of them have ended versus to what I'm dealing with today.
And it's a sort of relatively common experience, I think, that that sort of the range of choices available are narrowed because of the way society responds. And you can get into a vicious cycle. And there was a risk for you, wasn't there? A vicious cycle of becoming more of a carer to somebody who has a much more serious problem than you, rather than having a partner in life where you complement each other and you support each other and you grow together, which would be, if you like, a virtuous circle. You get into a vicious cycle of things getting more and more difficult. And I think you got caught up in that a little bit in some of your relationships, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. No. And like you say, it was just nice that, like, once it ended, it's like people say, when you're getting close to the end, you don't really see it and others do see it around you, sort of thing at all. And sometimes you just got to cut your losses and walk, and knowing that eventually somebody else is meant to be out there for you at all, that is on the equivalent, is not that dependency, codependency thing that's generally, a lot of people. And it probably goes back to how kids are raised, that they see the dynamics of their parents. And it's like the old adage, as I said to you yesterday, Tuesday, is that when any parent is given birth to a child, there's not an instructional manual how to raise that child. So like they only learn of how they were raised by their parents, sort of thing. So if they've had negative experience or bad experiences, it's going to be generational until somebody breaks that chain.
I think it's interesting talking to you, Glenn. Again, I'm sort of find it remarkable talking to you. I remember yesterday I was thinking, who is this guy? I mean, has he had problems or not? Is he just trying to sell his franchise to me? What's going on? And your story slowly eked out in the way it does, and because you don't just sort of rattle it off. I mean, I'm having to really prize it out of you. You're a bit sort of humble about it. But it's what's interesting for me is that rarely do men talk about being codependent.
Right.
It's not in the lexicon of maleness, but that's the truth for men who have psychological distress. They end up in codependent relationships, and codependency is a word that tends to be applied to women, you know. And go on, carry on.
Yeah, no, absolutely no. I didn't mean to cut you off. It's that, yeah, and I mean, it's and I'm sure you've heard this, and many others have heard this. You know, a lot of men generally looking for partners that are similar to who their mothers, no different than how girls look towards the perspective of people like their fathers, sort of thing. And you know, it's a vicious cycle, and I think allowing males growing up to express their emotions, like women are allowed to cry, girls aren't, or girls are allowed to cry, but men aren't. And you know, it's the perspective of having that bottled up, and is how it developed in anxiety, and for me and others that have become very violent, sort of thing at all. So, you know, understand, you know, both sexes have issues, have concerns, and the more that you can express them healthy, the better you're going to raise up a generation that will raise up the next generation, so on and so forth. And you'll have a healthy environment, healthy culture, healthy neighborhoods, versus the unhealthiness that's currently existing in society today.
It's great listening to you because you're very inspirational when you talk, and I'm still working on getting this story out of you, because I can hear you go into the version that exists. This is Glenn now, is this guy who is very, very educated about these issues and very able to talk to a public audience. I can hear it in you, and inspire people, and particularly as a sort of peer lived experience person. I'm going to keep digging away, if that's all right, because that's what I do.
Absolutely.
It's a sort of it's what I do for a living, unfortunately.
No problem, Noel. And like I say too, and maybe, you know, maybe it's exclusively to this province, but like again, if you screwed up in any part of life, especially here, it feels like the shame, and that's why I'm somewhat reluctant. But like, due to the fact, friends of me, to say you have an incredible story, you get out and speak it all. Nobody can take that away from you.
I'm with your friends on this one, Glenn. You do have an incredible story, and it's so understated in you as well.
And they say you can offer hope and inspiration to others that their lives can turn around and be successful as mine, or even more. And I would champion if somebody's even better than me. That's just my nature, is that, like, I want everybody to do good in life, whatever they want to choose.
And I think the thing is, in our sort of social media, Instagram world, we have this vision of mental illness whereby what happens is people get well and then they suddenly become a global megastar. It's not what happens at all. We continue to just struggle with life, but maybe have better ways of dealing with it than we did before that are less damaging. Can you think about, was there a time, or was it a period of time, a process, or was there an event which gave you the esteem you needed to go, I don't need to be codependent, I don't need to be somebody's carer, I'm worthy of somebody who can give me as much as I can give them? Did that happen as a revelation, or was it a slow educational change over time, do you think?
I think a bit of both, no.
Okay.
I think, you know, a combination of factors of, you know, trial and error of knowing that certain relationships didn't work, and just coming to the perspective, you know, you get to a point in life that, you know, judge me good or bad for whatever I do at all. And I know I've touched hundreds, thousands, maybe millions, you know, of offering people at all. And I think, you know, as they say, a bit of the gray hair, as my hairdresser says to me at times, you know, like, you earn those strands of wisdom, sort of thing. So show it off, sort of thing. And it's like, everybody says to have the wisdom at 18 or 25 would be actually dangerous. So I think it's the old adage. I heard a song the other day from the 90s, and I'm sure it was popular over there. I think the group was called Joe Public. It said, live and learn. But live and learn, and allow people to forgive and move on, and do not hold bitterness and gripe, because that's also very stiff in the male population.
Forgiveness is it's an odd one, because I think it's almost like people think it belongs in a church somewhere, but it's not. It's such a fundamental life and relationship skill, forgiveness. And I often say to people that, you know, we forgive because we want to keep somebody in our life. And it's probably the most fundamental relationship skill we're ever going to have, because without a doubt, there are times with anybody that we love that we want to kill them and get rid of them. And so, like, because they just triggered us into something, and we've just got to learn to forgive them and forget and move on, and it's a much underrated skill. So I think that's really important. The other part of it, though, is this more broad sense, and I think what excites me about the work that you're doing, and what excites me as a professional in mental health about peer work, about lived experience coming into the field, is that the goals of somebody like yourself who's in recovery from these struggles and problems are not the same as professionals. And what I mean by that is that I think as professionals, we might value our research, our techniques, our skills, our ability to alleviate problems and symptoms and cure people. But life isn't the absence of symptoms, is it? Of negative symptoms. Life really is something else, isn't it, I guess?
Absolutely. And I mean, some of the other work that I'm involved with, and I continue to do education and training, is delivering mental health first aid and suicide intervention, and which is all interlocked with the peer stuff at all. And, look, there's days that, look, I have bad days, as we all do at all. But it's the perspective of this continues for long periods of time with your anxiety or with your depression or with whatever mental health illness that you're dealing with, then it becomes much more clinical at all. Because, I mean, you can't be super happy. You can't be, everything butterflies and snowflakes all the time at all. We all have difficult days, and it could be from the perspective you're just fighting with your partner, or you're fighting with your children, you're fighting what you want to do for Christmas. You might have lost your job. You might have lost a loved one just recently, tragically, or natural causes. So it's how you deal with those emotions that are so critical. And again, from the male perspective, we were never taught to actually express that to anybody, but bottle up and use voices. And again, as I said to you, I've been very lucky that I've never been intoxicated in my life. I've never put a cigarette or any illicit drugs to my body at all. And again, that's where men will turn, and they think their coping mechanism,
without a doubt.
Which only creates bigger issues.
And is self-destructive. It's where guys will go, to be honest. It's sort of absolutely alcohol being the big one. So you have sort of touched upon certain areas and things that have been part of your recovery. So one is your faith. The other is developing loving relationships. The other is like loving intimate relationships. The other is having friends and mentors. Picking up people like this solicitor and the doctor and stuff like that, people who become important part of your support network. So that's social engagement and social connection, having purpose, the ability to help others. So this, we know altruism and helping other people helps our mental health. So these are the areas of another area which is often overlooked, though, is the idea of economic health, and the idea of being productive and making and earning a living and standing on your own 2 feet. And I guess that initially that could have been quite a challenge for you, because you're in mental health services, you're getting banged up by the police, Where do you find, so how did you somehow unscramble all of that and start moving into, and it's, I want to underscore this, that being able to work and earn money is fundamental in mental wellness. It's absolutely fundamental. And people just don't understand. We call it EET, employment educational training. And it's so important that people find a way into the employment market. So would you mind talking a little bit about your experience there, both outside of the employment market and then moving into the employment market, and what your history was with it?
Yeah, absolutely, Noel. And, when I was younger, like you say, challenging getting that education piece, completed, getting through the high school and trying to do the post-secondary, and same thing, trying to start jobs again, having that anxiety, which was very challenging to me to do, like customer service work. And post when I came through all this at all, I had the opportunity to, go out and do additional training in mental health, which has opened up doors. And again, I've also been a very have the opportunity with the various elections in our province and nationally to be engaged in management in terms of running things, how well I've done from the mental health perspective sort of thing. So like anytime there's been opportunities for employment, I've taken an opportunity, because I keep saying nobody's going to knock to Glenn's door and say, here, Glenn, here's a paycheck for you, or here's a paycheck that you don't have to get out of bed today. That's not happening, Noel. And
why is it not happening, Glenn? Why is it so important to you?
Well, it gives me a purpose.
Yeah.
It gives me an opportunity to give back, and it just makes me feel good that I can earn my own money and not have to be supported by government. And that's where a lot of people think, oh, quote unquote, you have that mental illness and you got that mental health challenge or that addiction, and the government is no, the government is not responsible for you have the choice in life, with the right supports, the right determination to go out and find employment. And there's all kinds of people, and I mean, there's people that are sitting on some of these systems too. So it's not just people that got mental illnesses and other challenges too, because it makes you feel good as a person that I can contribute. Because again, I've had family members say to me, like, Glenn, you would never work, you would never achieve it. You never, like, I got a recognition just a week ago from our lieutenant governor. If you don't call that success, I don't know what you want to call it. No.
I think you have success written all over you, Glenn, which is why I'm very excited that you're on the show. You're currently sort of involved in a franchise which has been struggling, and I said we would talk about it. I don't normally talk about these things because, but I think in your case it's really important, and because getting well isn't just about getting the right treatments, and professionals like me forget that. We forget absolutely that. Getting well is about people feeling that they have power and control and autonomy within their own lives.
And you use the word that I always champion every day: autonomy.
Yeah.
That's one of my go-to words, Noel. And being involved with this company at all, it's called Eat Clean Healthy Grill. Yeah. And we'll maybe put it up on the thing if anybody's interested.
It'll already be up there. I promise you, James will already have put a link out there and people can go and check.
Perfect. Yeah. And the importance and having this opportunity to promote this, because at the end of the day, it's more than the business. It's giving people healthy lifestyles, which goes back to people's mental health and wellness. Yeah. Because if people are eating, quote unquote, the fast food joints, if it's the Mary Browns, if it's the McDonald's, if it's the Burger Kings of the world, or whatever you have in the United Kingdom.
Before McDonald's sue me, Glenn's saying this. I happen to agree with him, so you can sue me as well, but sue him first.
Or any of them at all.
Oh, no, the thing is, Jamie Oliver, who's a chef over here in the UK, has just won a case against McDonald's because he said quite clearly the food should not be eaten. It's not fit for human consumption. They got really angry about it, but he's just literally won that case, proving the point, and you're proving the point as well. It's the truth.
Well, I'll give you the prime example at all is that, like, when we open up one location out in Western Canada, the competition for healthy was gone in under 7 months. So we have a superior product. You're having healthy, bison, healthy sweet potato, all sorts of healthy wraps and smoothies and juices, and versus the garbage that effectively is all manufactured. It gives people a quick high, but then people are completely sick after it at all, and I think the industry is changing because people are knowing that, like 50 years ago, when these first fast food organizations went on the market, the levels of cancer, diabetes, heart disease and the mental health have also increased. So there's a high correlation of the sodium and the processed meats and the processed foods. And luckily enough, my parents were smart enough not to put that into my body. But you see the kids, and I see my nieces and nephews and others who have children, and just seeing them growing up on these chicken McNuggets and all these fast food little things, and knowing that they should be putting milk into their body or putting something more healthier, sort of thing. So
it's also about, and again, it seems to be very much about your approach to life. So, like, there's this problem with the police being the wrong tool to deal with the job, which is 75% of the job that the police have to deal with are people in psychological distress. That's not their job. They don't know how to deal with it. So rather than moan about that and say, oh, it's wrong, let's blame the police, what you did was get involved in helping the police with new resources so that they could manage that situation. And again, rather than say, oh, we should shut down McDonald's, what you're seem to be saying is, no, that's how people want to eat. Let's find a way of providing for that, but providing some good quality stuff for them rather than just buying into delivering rubbish to people. And that seems to be who you are as a person. It's remarkable. To everything you look at, you seem to be going, okay, this is the reality. How do I improve reality rather than how do I just get angry about it and get rid of it?
Absolutely. And again, listen, I'm as guilty as you at times when we're having a bad day that we'll make a run to the McDonald's and eat, or any of the fast food organizations at all.
I have no option with an 11-year-old boy, I'm telling you.
That's so true, Noel, at all.
McDonald's is absolutely on the menu at times, so every now and then we do, and I can't get away with it. So yeah, absolutely. But absolutely. But I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, sir. Yeah, no. I just saying, Noel, is that it's all about moderation. It's how you consume stuff at all. It goes back to vices. It goes back to life in general at all. The more that you choose on healthy choices, and the consequences are going to come back, i.e., if you drink a lot, you're going to have issues with your physical health, your kidneys and otherwise. It's the same thing of putting unhealthy food in your body 24/7. Eventually, that's going to happen.
You didn't need to convince me. There's an open door you're pushing out there.
Right.
But sort of, I guess, from a psychological perspective, what I'm trying to get to is this, and for people to understand this, that given the way your life has been, the outcomes could have been you part of some incel group picking up a gun, shooting people, and that's the narrative that's out there, right? Mm-hmm. It's this sort of awkward guy, red hair, sort of bald white skin from some Irish background and isolated, and that's a dangerous person in people's eyes. You fail at school, you end up in the criminal justice system, you end up in the mental health system, and it's like the outcomes for that guy are supposedly quite seriously negative, but that's not the case for you, right?
Absolutely.
And you've taken stuff and you've transformed it into something. You haven't become, a universal megastar. Sort of, I don't think Tom Cruise is going to get worried that you're going to take over his job tomorrow, but you have transformed your life in a remarkable way, and you're setting a new narrative around the isolated sort of guy, dangerous guy with mental health problems. You somehow are changing that narrative very significantly, Glenn. It's a ridiculous question I'm going to ask you. There probably isn't. Is there something core in you? Where did you get this from? That I'm going to work with and improve reality rather than let it smash me to bits. What would you say? Why have you learned that lesson rather than the other one, which is I'm angry, isolated, I'm going to hurt other people for it?
Well, maybe it's a perspective too, Noel. And you talk about that megastar. The other thing you can throw to your viewers, and I'll give you that answer just 1 second. Back in 2012, I wrote to former U.S. President Barack Obama, as I said.
Did you really? Of course.
And I actually got a letter from the former 41st president, and I actually seen him when he was in Newfoundland 2 years ago. Right. So, you talk about success at all, and what I think that I can leave to your viewers and to yourself and everybody else is that it proved to myself that I could do this, and maybe to others that said they couldn't at all, that Glenn can happen. So believe in yourself at all. Even if there's always somebody out there that's in your corner. And if not, there is a God. I'm a Christian. I believe that there is a Christ out there, Jesus. His birth is his celebration coming up in 10 days. And for whatever you believe in at all, you can do it at all. Never give up. I'm a proof example. It can happen at all. And just keep at it at all. I keep on trucking.
It's wonderful stuff, Glenn. It's really wonderful story. And, I hope more and more people get to hear this story, because we have to have these narratives out there. We can't allow the minority of guys who just get angry and destructive to have the show. Then they shouldn't be allowed to have the show. We need to be taking back. Can I ask, what did Mr. Obama say to you? I'm going to call him President Obama because I admire him so much. He's still the president as far as I'm concerned, particularly given what followed him. I just don't even want to think about that, right? We'll skip over that one, sort of, please. What did he say to you?
Well, what he said to me, Noel, is that, he appreciated me taking the time to write him. And I think he very much appreciated the good work that I'm doing in mental health and mental health advocacy. And I think our values are very much aligned, and we can have a better, safer, kinder, general world sort of thing. And
Yeah.
it touched me very much that, of all the letters he would get from American citizens, he took an opportunity to write back a Canadian, a Newfoundlander, more importantly at all. As I said, how many Canadians, Newfoundlanders, or maybe UKs can prove a document that has the presidential seal and the White House on that
Not
document?
me,
I
mate.
said, very
Not
few.
me. I'm in awe. We are not worthy. I'm sort of. I sort of look. We are at the end of the show, unfortunately. But as I said to you yesterday, we often swing by and bring people back on, which is what we'll do with you. Maybe we'll ask Barak to come and join us as well, if he's free. It could be Barak, you, me, him. We'll have a little chinwag. Who knows? I'll send him a letter and see if he fancies me catching up with you again, Glenn, and we'll do a session with him. So we will have put the link to your franchise, and we'll sort of, as this show goes out, when it goes out, we'll put links to your to the prizes that you've won, the human rights, so that people can see what you're doing. Do you actually have a website just for yourself? Is there one where people can find out more about you?
It's currently under construction, but I mean, they can look at it through the social media, and if James can put out the Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at all.
So your Twitter is at Glenn Roil, isn't it?
That's correct.
All one word, which is, we can put that up. What's your Instagram handle? Is it Glenn Roil as well?
It's Glenn Roil 75.
Glenn Roil 75. So James will put that up now.
And Facebook is just Glenn Roil, lowercase again.
Okay, so and we'll put all those out, and they'll go out to people. It's sort of, this is meant sort of with deep love in my heart. I'm glad that you haven't turned into a sort of plastic version of wellness, that you still maintain your authentic self, that you sort of haven't become a mega star. There are some people that are using their story of struggle to turn themselves into megastars at the moment, and they just make tons of money out. I find them a bit tedious and boring, and it's not, I don't know, it's fine, they get on with their lives, but I don't know that it helps other people all that much, to be honest. My sense for you, Glenn, is because you're still very accessible, your experience is still you're very much yourself, and I feel strongly that a lot of men who will listen to you will be able to really, really identify and find, that thing that we need, goals that are far enough away but close enough to us. If it's too far away, it feels like we can't achieve it. And somehow you manage to do that, sort of make it feel like this is achievable. And it's very impressive.
I think, because again, even if I do a change, more financial thing, I'll still be the core person. At the end of the day, all I need is enough money to function, to have a great partner, have a great family at all, and contribute back to the community. As I, again, involved with so many different volunteer organizations at all. I'm just very humble and very grateful to have this and use this negative experience and turn it around for the betterment of society at all. And I'm very blessed.
Well, making money is really important, without a doubt. And I grew up in poverty, and I can tell you it's shit. There's nothing pleasant about it. It's not something I'd wish on anybody, actually, to be honest. So go out and make money, get really comfortable. I thoroughly encourage that, particularly at times like this. We do need to finish there. We're going to have to say goodbye. You stay there with us, Glenn. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And I think we've got another show next week, and then we're off for a couple of weeks. But I'm fairly sure we have a show next week, and I'll know afterwards. James will tell me. But it's been lovely having everybody here. I'm going to say goodbye for now, and hope to see you all next Wednesday. So bye-bye for now.